Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishar. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu. So we continue from where we left last time. We didn't have a class because of Easter. The Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan class, which normally is on the first and third Saturdays, we had to postpone because the center was closed for almost a week. But anyway, we will begin as if we just recapitulate what we said last time. We discussed why the Upanishads say that we have to take a human body before we can continue our spiritual evolution. There was a question which was anticipated. The writer of this book, he anticipates a question: why is it necessary to have a human body before we can continue our spiritual evolution? After having done a lot of sadhana, suppose somebody dies. So Krishna is asked the same question in the Bhagavad Gita. If you remember, Arjuna is worried that all the efforts that he intends to do, suppose before he accomplishes or reaches the goal, he dies, then what happens? Normally, people compare their spiritual progress with their worldly attainments. So, naturally, when people grow old, they are worried because all their hard earned money, property, and other things they have to leave behind, which is not a very pleasant thing for most people, unless, of course, they are happy if somebody else, if they have led a noble life and they are convinced that the money and everything that they have left behind will be utilized properly, then it's a different case. But rarely we'll find such people because that worry, that anxiety of leaving behind everything that one had strived for the whole life is not a very pleasant experience, at least when one is about to depart from this world. So Arjuna naturally asks the same question. In fact, it was the fear of death, the uncertainty of the war, that made him argue with Sri Krishna, that all of a sudden he felt nervous, he felt a lot of fear came all of a sudden, though he was very sure of his capacity to fight the war. We find that Arjuna panics. That was the whole topic of the Vishada Yoga, the first chapter. And in the second chapter, Sri Krishna explains to him, and then he goes on and on and on explaining the different paths to one's spiritual evolution. And Arjuna is convinced, though initially he asks many questions, and he's a bit confused also in the third chapter. He asks, now you tell me what exactly I should do. You are glorifying one path, which means that I should not fight the war. On the other hand, you say you have to fight this war. So Krishna gives him a very convincing answer. He says, unless you make yourself fit for higher spiritual evolution, you have to follow the path, you have to just follow your Swadharma until you reach a state where you can take up higher and higher Swadharma. And finally, in the 18th chapter is said, it says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vrajaha. And so after having explained all the possibilities and all the different yogas or different ways to reach the goal of life, he finally tells him, now you do as you wish, but ultimately you have to give up the so-called Swadharma for which you are now fighting. So Arjuna is again perhaps left in a state of confusion. So, in between, you'll find Arjuna again asking a lot of questions, which you'll find in the Upanishads as well. When Nachiketa is asking about life after death, it is uncertainty of what happens to a person after death which causes a spirit of inquiry. What exactly is life for? Why do we live? What do we gain to achieve at the end of our life? So also, after explaining the Upanishads, we discussed that liberation is the special privilege of human life, not of other creatures. Because that inbuilt self-awareness or that consciousness to that capacity for self-reflection and not just use our reactive mind, which we share with the animal kingdom. Animals just react to external circumstances. If you do no better than that, there's hardly any difference between us and these animals, because they are in fact more sensitive to certain things, sound, smell, and they are more, in fact, their manas or their minds are more developed as far as certain senses are concerned. They can react much better. The action and reaction process is so quicker in some dogs and in some animals. So that is not what we are speaking of. We spoke about the buddhi or the higher mind, which is unique to human beings, where we have that power of self-reflection, which is not available for any other creature, including the so-called people who live in heavens. That is something strange to understand. We often think that after death, if one goes to heaven or the Swarga or whatever concepts of heaven one has, because everybody wants to have an extension of his life on this earth, and he thinks the life in heaven would be much better. No doubt it might be good for a few years, but then when the karmas exhaust, as the Upanishad says, you have to take birth again and start all over again, or from where you left. So the logical question is, if no doubt the privilege of human life is that is, it's a special privilege of human life to develop this buddhi or the idea of consciousness, awareness. Awareness is a better word. So this self-awareness or consciousness, which is unique to human beings, which make him pause before taking any actions. So the mind evolves from a reactive mind, which is manas, to buddhi, which is not just reactive, which is contemplative, which is discriminatory. It tries to find out what is to be done, what is not to be done. That wonderful power of making choices in life, especially the right choice. So we call it Viveka Buddhi, and that has been given a lot of importance. And in fact, we discussed last time, this self-awareness or this Vivek Buddhi is in fact the beginning of spiritual life. The entire spiritual life begins when we develop this Viveka Buddhi. It begins. And that is given only to human beings to develop this buddhi and always discriminate between Shreya and Preya. This is a very important concept. This power to decide, power to make right choices in life. Because one wrong choice leads to another wrong choice, then it leads to another, and then there's no way out. It's very difficult to retrace. Even in ordinary careers, we find once you make a wrong choice under some kind of pressure, then it takes a lot of time to retrace one's steps and then make the right choice again and follow that. Time is very short. So Arjuna here is worried. And Upanishads also, many places, many aspirants are asking the same question. Since time is short, what happens if we don't achieve the goal of life before the body falls off? So a very authentic and appropriate answer is given by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Suchinam Srimatam Gehe. Yoga Brashta, they call it Yoga Brashta. Yoga Brashta means If I have not attained the goal of yoga and something happens to me when I am in that process of spiritual evolution, what will happen? Will everything be wasted? Like all the money, I just can't use it either in heaven or in the next birth. Nobody claim the assets and the wealth one has left behind. That is gone for all, gone for ever. Everything, you cannot take anything with you. Is it the same? This is a very important question which needs to be answered before one undertakes the spiritual path. And it's a very logical question. What if I don't reach the goal? Will the same thing happen which normally happens to a dying man when he is fearful of the prospect of leaving his things behind? So, what about my spiritual attainments? I struggle my whole life and finally I don't reach the goal. So, do I have to begin all over again? No, Sri Krishna says, whatever you do in the mind, in the subtle body, which go on to form the sanskaras, they survive the physical body. This is a very important thing in the theory of karma and rebirth and reincarnation, which not only Hinduism, Buddhism and all the Asian religions, they believe. Because if everything is lost, like all the physical assets are lost, just as the physical body goes away, all the physical assets are left behind. And it would be ridiculous to even imagine that somebody, when he is born again, can claim what he has left behind, that is gone forever. So naturally, people or sadhakas have this question: will the same thing happen to all the spiritual merit that we have gained by doing upasana and sadhana? In that case, we will have to begin with a clean slate. No, that is not the case. So, though Srimad Bhagavata, we discussed that verse 11.9.29, Labdva sudurlabham idam bahu sambhavante, means after so many births, if you have got a human body, as Sri Ramakrishna said, make full use of it for the right purpose. Otherwise, it is like, they have used a very harsh word, it is like committing suicide. If you don't use the body for the purpose, the purpose of human body, whether you accept Hinduism or any other religion, but especially Hinduism, if you see the Advaita, Shankaracharya also says in Vivek Chudamani, it's so very rare things, three rare things are there. Manushyatvam is the first one, to get this human body. Sri Ramakrishna also says, having got this human body, if you don't use it for the purpose for which you took birth, what is the purpose? He says, if you don't use it, then it is like committing suicide. A person, in the physical sense, if you see, a person maybe is very wealthy, but is mentally ill and something happens and he commits suicide. So what's the use of acquiring all the wealth? He could not even physically enjoy that wealth, which he worked so hard to enjoy. Similarly, having got the physical body, if it is not used for spiritual evolution, in the language of the Upanishads or Vedanta, it is like committing spiritual suicide, not physical suicide. What do you mean by this spiritual suicide? Now, as I told you, Sri Krishna tells that nothing is ever lost. No good is good, in the sense, whatever you do for your spiritual evolution is not lost, because the subtle things only survive, not the gross things that we acquire. The subtle things cannot be lost because they find their way into the Sukshma Sharira. Then, as I told you, there are three layers of our personalities: Sthula, Sukshma and Karana. Karana is where our causal body is, which survives death, and when we take up the body, we are born with the baggage of that karma, maybe in different circumstances, in a different body. But those samskaras, those attainments, spiritual attainments are preserved. And if we believe Sri Krishna's statement, we are born in a spiritually inclined or a family, yoginam api. I mean, either in the family of yogis or Srimatam. Srimatam is not just wealthy, it means a cultured and not only a wealthy family where the person has to bother about earning money. He, like Bhagwan Buddha, for example, he was born in a family, wealthy family, but the samskaras of a yogi were inherent in him. So in both cases, one is born with that uh, born with that advantage, which if he uses, he can use to evolve in the next birth. So nothing is lost. Sri Krishna very clearly tells Arjuna, whatever little spiritual practice or spiritual good you do, nothing is lost. Maybe wealth and other things and property is lost because it is in the achievements are in the gross world. Just as you lose the gross body, which you see every day, we human beings, that is what Yudhishthira said, every day people see that death is inevitable, but still they feel they will keep on eternally living in this physical body, which is not the case. So, just as the physical things are destroyed after death, there is no destruction of the spirit or the causal samskaras. That is what is said in this Bhagavata verse. The wise man, after having many births, obtained this extremely rare human body. So even the body of a Gandharva and in heaven, they just exhaust their good deeds. Even if one assumes that one gets some kind of temporary uh, place where he can enjoy the fruits, the subtle fruits of his gross actions, because there is no gross body to enjoy. Maybe he enjoys it in the mind. That is what Swarga means. That is what heaven means. So that heaven, even at some stage or the other, that heaven, that karma will get exhausted. And Upanishad very clearly said, we discussed that last time, that he has to take a human birth again. There is no other way. When the merits of the past lives, several lives, they are exhausted. There is a certain limit even to the life one experiences in heaven, according to the Indian scriptures. So when they are exhausted, again he is born. That is why some of the saints, they prefer to, they don't even, they reject heaven like Nachiketa did. Though his father was very happy that if he performed certain circumstances, he will live. But our Nachiketa was much more wiser than his own father, though he was his guru. He said, see, the scriptures very clearly says, when all the punya is exhausted, my dear father, you will have to come back. So why waste your time? Try to get liberation in this life itself. That is what Nachiketa is telling his father. But his father was very arrogant. He said, who are you to teach me? Then you know the whole story. So the answer is given by both Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita and also in the Upanishads, in the Kathopanishad by Yama, who explains to this young boy how one should strive for liberation before one leaves the body. So the question of Jivan Mukti has been confirmed here. Does one get liberation while still in the body? Then why will he continue to live? But our scriptures are unanimous that Jivan Mukta or Sthita Prajna, as Sri Krishna says, he explains the characteristic of such a person who attains to that state while living. So moksha is not something which you attain just as you attain heaven after death. You get moksha, you can get it while you are still living. It's a state which one should achieve while one is still living, and that is why this whole book a disciple of Shankaracharya, who wrote that famous book Jivan Mukti Viveka. It's a very complicated book. Very long description is given, proving the fact that mukti can be had here and now. But obviously it is not easy. If it were easy, then everybody would have free. How does a free person live? The characteristics are given there. So Krishna tells, if you see this in the verse which we just discussed now, in the Bhagavad, of course, in the Bhagavatam, not in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, gaining the first and the foremost requisite, namely the human body, which is very difficult to attain. Why is it difficult to attain? Because even if one has good samskaras, it has to wait till it gets a proper body to work out the karma. That is not very well known. People think as soon as the body, the soul passes away, it has a choice to just take up another body. Though the relatives may like that. You see, many of the people who are very much attached to their ancestors, the moment a child is born, they will say, oh, see, his grandfather has been born, who would have died much earlier. He said, perhaps he has been born here. Because they think my grandfather has the same attachment as me. So he is born as my grandson or something. And we people try to at least imagine that that is the case. But that is not the case. It's not that one can wish and choose where he is, where he should be born or where he will be born. That will depend on his prarabdha, not prarabdha, his karma, which is stored in his karana sharira. So it searches for a suitable body where he can work out his karma, not only good karma but also the evil karma. So either he will be born with certain good samskaras, a noble family, or he may be born. The very fact that he is born in a noble family doesn't ensure that he will be his spiritual evolution is ensured. Sometimes one gets that feeling. If you see, there are so many instances where people have been born in very bad families, but somehow one of them, though all the children got the same training, one of them does something different than what the others do. So it's not just nurture, one's own nature. People often like to say that 50% is nature, then 50 is nurture. In fact, modern psychology or modern education believes that everything is nurture. However, if you nurture a child properly, he will be born. But we saw in our Raj Yoga class very clearly that most of the samskaras are in a prasupta avastha. In a child, we don't understand what that child is capable of. No matter how much nurture is there, if the very nature of that person he has a lot of evil samskaras which are not manifest when he is born. Maybe he has a very innocent childhood, but suddenly those old samskaras come out and he becomes a evil person. The opposite is also true. No matter even if a person is born in a very evil-minded family with very bad surroundings, but somehow when his old samskaras, the good samskaras which he has accumulated through several lives, suddenly start uh, manifesting, and then he takes a turn. We discussed the life of Tulsidas, Valmiki, how they changed overnight. That is what he says, that first of all, it is very difficult to get a human body. But at the same time, he says, this body, the purpose of this body, according to Bhagavata, is just like a strong boat. Beyond that, it does not guarantee that your journey will be safe. But of course, a human body is like a boat. With the teacher as its helmsman, the one who runs the boat is equally important. Teacher means here the guru. So the But the whole thing, the whole boat has to be propelled by me. No doubt you have a good, but if there is a storm, then the whole boat will capsize. So a strong boat does not ensure spiritual evolution, nor does a strong guru, but it has the Lord's grace, God who is incarnate in human form. Here the question of Avtara comes as a favorable wind. So Sri Ramakrishna in his own way, the same thing which is there in the Bhagavata, he is explaining. He said, unless the grace, the wind of God's grace is always flowing, what does human effort do? He has to raise the mast. If the sails and the mast is not raised, if it is lying down, no matter how much the wind of grace is flowing, wind of grace is always flowing. We don't have to, Sri Ramakrishna is to very clearly say, you just say that when will God shower his grace upon me? It is already there. But the thing that you have to do is, first of all, raise the mast and open the sail so that it gets the benefit of the wind. So he says, if having got a boat, means having got a human body, very strong boat with strong sails, that is somebody to guide you, even after that, if you don't raise the sails and use the boat for crossing the ocean of samsara, then it is like it's like committing spiritual suicide. So in Vedanta, Vivek Chudamani, Shankaracharya repeats the same thing. He says there are three things which are rare indeed. Durlabham trayam eva etat anu devanugraha hetukam manushyatvam mumukshatvam mahapurusha sanshraya. That the three things which are very rare, like this boat example which Sri Ramakrishna gives, the boat, the sail and the wind. First is the grace of God, which are the wind of grace of God is always flowing. But first you have to have a human boat. There should be a boat. Otherwise, how will you cross? If the wind may be there, but if the boat is not strong, boat represents human birth, manushyatvam, mumukshutvam, and a longing for liberation. What is that longing for liberation? It is like the effort that you make to raise the mast and the sail. So at least that much we have to do, that mumukshutvam, that intense desire to use this boat, this physical body, human birth which we have got, to reach the goal of life, is what Shankaracharya says. But for that, to raise the mast or to spread the sails, you need Mahapurusha Sanshraya, the company of the great people, or the guidance of great people, which can be Avtara, which can be a saint, which can be good books. So any kind of inspiration that you get, either from human beings, from scriptures, or from God himself directly, the protective care of a great sage, that is what it says. So it is the great sages who have given us these Upanishads, so that protective care is always there, provided we accept it as our guide. So three things are very rare, according to the Vivek Chudamani: Manushyatvam, Mumukshutvam. First of all, you should have a human body, the boat. Then there should be the longing for liberation, that the desire to move that boat forward. How? By raising the sail, which the teacher, that is the protective care of a great sage, will help you in doing. And then finally the grace of God, which is the wind which is already blowing. So now the man who has somehow attained to human birth, there is another verse which is there, which is the next verse, the fourth verse. The man who, having somehow attained a human birth, and above all, here it is somehow there is some kind of discrimination. That is why they say, here it is written that he should have mastery of the Vedas. Now the commentators interpret it in different way. People think it is the intellectual or academic understanding. So they think only a person who has read the Vedas. You find many saints who don't even very literate. That is why Sri Ramakrishna was born. That is not what is meant here. Shruti Paradarsh Darsha Darshanam. Shruti Paradarshanam. Now this has been misunderstood, or some commentators say you should be well versed in the Shrutis or the Vedas. That means one has to be a Vedic scholar. But we see many of the Vedic scholars, they're intensely attached to their scholarship, intensely attached to wealth. There's absolutely no spiritual progress in them. So what does the Shruti Paradarshanam? So what it means is the essence of the Shruti should be known by that person. And Swami Vivekananda very clearly says, because this idea was there, in fact, if you see the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where in the first conversation itself, Master Mashay is asking that servant maid who was outside, Brinde, he was hesitant. That is typical English manner. Should we go inside or not in that room in Dakshineshwar? The first question he asks, that is he free now? Can we go in? He said, no, no, you just go in. Then before going, he just wants to know from this lady, because he's never met Sri Ramakrishna. He says, does he read many books? So that was the typical idea of modern educated professors. He was a professor, he was a teacher. Does he read many books? Means, should I spend my time with the illiterate person, or is he really well read? So the idea was that if one reads a lot of books, one is spiritual. That was the training he had got from the Brahmo training and the Western education that he had. So Shruti Paradarsha, many people will say you have to understand, you have to read the Upanishads. That's why people run after these courses and listen to talks. But is that enough, or is that what is meant when in the Bhagavata Sri Krishna is telling this? So the mastery of the Vedas or doesn't mean mastery of the academic or intellectual understanding of the Vedas. It means understanding the essence of the Vedas. If that is not there, then any amount of mastery. So Master Mahashaya M, who recorded the gospel, asks Vrinde how many does he read many books? Because the idea that somebody can be knowledgeable without reading books was not even conceivable by this Mahendranath Gupta. So he asked, does he read many books? Then Vrinde, though she is illiterate, obviously she was just a worker there in the temple, just cleaning. Obviously she is not read books, but see her inside. She said, what? Reading books? Everything is in his mouth. Means she has heard him speaking the truth. So she is having faith. She is a simple village woman without any education. So even she has understood that he doesn't have to read these books, everything is in his mouth. She did not know how it has come to his mouth, how he is able to explain these great spiritual truths. And so he that Vrinde very casually tells him, as if, oh, or to sab book hai, it's everything is, he doesn't have to read books to get knowledge. And that was one of the first surprises M had. He said, how a person who has not gone to university, read books, and how can he have knowledge that is not compatible with his understanding of how spirituality is to be attained? So that is why mastery of the Vedas should not be understood. He knew the essence of what the Vedas said. Of course, he had heard, and his concentration was so much that whatever he heard, he could remember. It's not that these things were not discussed. He had a keen sense of observation. So you see, even when he saw a boat, he was thinking of connecting some spiritual idea to it, which does not come from, it has to come through intuition. So reason has a limitation. Reason can allow you. That's why if you go to a academic, to do an academic course on these Vedas and Upanishads and Gita, they'll take you round and round. Finally, you end up knowing nothing, because the approach itself is wrong. Whereas Sri Ramakrishna did not go to university. I'm not saying that these are Swamiji's words. Swami Vivekananda once said that he is more original than all of us because he never went to university. We all understood many things through second-hand knowledge, knowledge of books, knowledge of other scholars. We just remembered them, passed exams, and then we are trying to understand the whole world through our stupid intellect. But he was fresh. He had a very fresh approach to life. Everything he saw was full of light. That is how the rishis got their knowledge. So in Hinduism and Sri Ramakrishna, he says, just to show to the world that spiritual knowledge is not the exclusive privilege of university professors or academicians. Sri Ramakrishna deliberately in this incarnation, he came as an illiterate person, just to show that in the purified mind of a sadhaka, these ideas spontaneously reveal themselves. How do they reveal? Through a faculty which is known as intuition. When you see a certain thing, you don't need somebody to explain those things to you. You don't need when you experience certain things, no matter how many scholars come and try to say that it does not exist or this is wrong, but that person who had that intuitive knowledge, he says, I have seen it. How can I remember the famous Ramanujam who studied in Cambridge University. Even his professor Hardy was surprised how he could come. If he later on the others struggled to prove, but he could get the solutions by his intuition. He used to pray. They say whatever method he used, it was that intuitive faculty which was suddenly awakened, as a result of which he could work out solutions, and it took scholars a lot of time to prove the theories, to prove the results that he put forward. But when his professor saw that most of these results, how does he skip so many steps and come to a conclusion? That is what is meant by Shruti Paradarshanam. You have to understand it in that sense. So Sri Ramakrishna does not have to, like other Pandits, go through the commentary, read this, that Upanishad. That is meant for us. And as Swami Vivekananda said, it just does some street cleaning. So if a street is full of dirt, the study of the scriptures just helps you to clean that road. But walking you have to do yourself. Just cleaning the streets will not help you. You have to put in effort. So these people, their streets are clean. They just can see truth as they see people around them. That is what is meant by Shruti Paradarshanam. Darshanam actually means an intuitive understanding. It's not just an intellectual understanding. Darshana, the word philosophy, in the Indian context, it is translated as philosophy. Philosophy is something which you intellectually try to establish or understand. Whereas darshana means you see. Darshana. In many of the Indian languages, when you say darshan hua, means see, to see. So the equivalent of darshan is not vision, but intuition. Vision can mean just physical seeing with the eyes. No, it is an intuitive understanding. So if you have intuitive understanding of spiritual truths, then you have understood the Shruti. Shruti in this case here means, definitely it means the Upanishads or the Vedas, which are the primary scriptures. All others are known as Smritis, including the Bhagavad Gita and other later texts. Because all the major ideas, the intuitive understanding or intuitive collective wisdom of the rishis. So Sri Ramakrishna was one person who, according to Swamiji, just to validate how rishis got their knowledge. The Vedas were not just written in universities. In those days, there were no universities. They were just meditating in the forest. But through intuitive understanding of this, because the spiritual truths cannot be academically understood. Of course, other skills were taught in the Gurukula. People used to be taught how to earn a living, certain skills which they needed for earning money or doing certain things in life. But for spiritual knowledge, intuition was the awakening of the buddhi, was the only way. Unless once buddhi was awakened, unless and until the reactive mind evolved to a state where one could perceive these spiritual truths, not just understand the spiritual truths. Understanding is at a lower level, is a lower state. So that understanding, when it matures into intuitive understanding, that is known as trying to para darshana, means you understand the Shrutis in a different way. Then he says the man who has somehow attained to human birth and has a mastery of the Vedas, in the sense Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated or lived, he is foolish enough not to strive after liberation. He literally commits suicide, for he kills himself by clinging to those things which are unreal. So if a person is intellectually convinced, he may still cling to the things which he is surrounded with. It is not so easy to give up unreal things, even if we know it is unreal. That is because only an intuitive understanding or only a complete conviction of things that the things that are real, or that which is the spirit, that which is eternal, is only worth striving for, and the things that have a temporal value, a temporary value, which anyway we have to leave behind when we go, they are not of much importance. So we don't cling to them. But here you remember the word is not clinging. Asat grahat. Asat grahat means, asat means unreal or temporary. So anything that is temporary doesn't cling. You see, it should not be misunderstood that he hates. Hatred is another way of liking. If you have strong likes and dislikes, if you strongly dislike certain things. So a person who does not cling to the unreal things is very comfortable even if he lives with this unreal, but he doesn't get attached to those things. That is a subtle difference which Arjuna could not understand, and Krishna had to tell him again and again. By giving up, it is not possible to give up the unreal. It is only possible to give up the attachment to the unreal. Because the unreal is something which is eternally existent with us. Avidya comes as soon as we have the ego. As you see the whole of creation, you can't wish away Maya. It's a state of things that come with us. The moment we are born, we are born with our egos. That ego is either goes on increasing and more bondage results, or we can reduce it and we get detached. First, from the external things, we get detached. Not that we have to give them away, which Arjuna wanted to do. He just wanted to avoid this war. He said, no, by avoiding war, you are not solving the problem. You just be in the midst of that conflict. But at the same time, don't get attached, not cling. Clinging means to get attached. Asat grahat. Grahana means to catch. If there is a famous joke which Swami Vivekananda used to say. He says there was a Tartar. Tartars are very strong people. So when they came, everybody closed their doors. So then once in one house, before he could close the door, something happened, and somebody from inside the house, the lady of the house, was saying, "What has happened? Just close the door, and there is a Tartar. There is a Tartar. Tartars are very strong people." So he said, "Oh, no, just give him up. I mean, don't run after him, then you will die." He said, "I have given him up, but he has not given me up. He has caught hold of me." So he was shouting because he could not come in, because that is what happens. We get caught. We don't necessarily, we are not clinging to unreal things, but the unreal things cling to us. So that is the challenge. It's very easy to say that unreal things should be given up, but that is the whole purpose behind all our spiritual pursuits, spiritual evolution. So now, to understand this, we come to another topic, the subtle body. Without understanding what the subtle body is and how it is attached to the gross body, we will not understand what is giving up attachment. It's very easy to say giving up attachment. By giving up attachment, what actually happens? That we have to understand. That is why the five gross elements which we discussed earlier, the Sthula Sharira, first we will discuss the subtle body, then we'll come to the gross body, and then the Karana Sharira. So the same five gross elements as the physical universe, which is perceptible by the sense organs, but the subtle body is not perceptible. Like we see things, we hear things, we taste things. The sense organs help us to interact with the gross universe, but the subtle body, which is composed of the same five elements but in a subtle form, the subtle forms they are known as uncompounded. It's a bit difficult to understand. How can earth or solids have a subtle counterpart? So they call it Akasha, Vayu, Tejaha, Apa, water, Prithvi. That covers the whole range of, because we understand everything. Prithvi means solids. Anything that you can feel, hard things. Up, that is water. Water means not necessarily just water, but liquids. Any liquid. So all the forms are covered now, because we have to imagine. Subtle body cannot be perceived by our senses. See, for example, if I say hard, I know what hard means. It is a solid. You can feel it. It is solid. Nobody will say it's liquid. But you know what liquid is. That is because we have been trained in such a way. The whole gross ideas are very quickly grasped by us. So we have Tejas, that is, you may say the fire or anything that burns, or you may say it is not gaseous. Gaseous is Vayu, which you cannot see, but solid, liquid and gas. But there is a state which is beyond that, which is known as Agni, which can roughly correspond to a state which is known as plasma, which we see in the sun and the other things. You can't say they are solids, you can't say they are gaseous, you can't say they are liquids. They are in a very, very intense hot form. That is known as Agni. And then Akasha, ether, which is the all-pervading space. So now it is maybe difficult to imagine how can you have an internal space and external space. Means we think it is physical space, but Upanishad introduces a very, very subtle concept which is known as Dahara Akasha. It is difficult to imagine, but without that you can't practice Upasana or Sadhana. Dahara Akasha means that space. See, you use space in, all of us use space in different contexts in different ways. For you, for a person, you say this is physical space. So I want more space. You just don't crowd here. That's physical. But there is another space which many of us understand. When you are suffocated by the presence of some people, you just tell them, please give me some space. That means just leave my mind alone. I want my space. Can you see that space? But you can imagine that space. A space which is always coming in conflict with others. It's a mental space. You can't see it. Maybe that person is not even here. He is far off. He is not infringing in your physical space. But mentally, that space. So you use space in that sense also. Just to give an idea what this subtle Akasha is. So they say now you have to meditate. Then you will feel, then we have to meditate on Thakur in the heart. So is the heart, I understand, heart occupies some physical space, so we put him there. No, that is not the idea. It is a subtle space where he is present in subtle form. He is present in his original form. At least we have to imagine, because first we have to take the first step to going from gross to subtle. So that is why Shankaracharya in his Atma Bodha says, the subtle body, which is the means of the jiva's experience for the results of his karma, consists of five pranas. Now you have to understand, he is explaining, because the word subtle, just to say subtle body, what do you mean by subtle body? We understand the gross body, but who runs the gross body? So what are the different elements which constitute our subtle body? He says five pranas. We have discussed a lot, we will not repeat. Prana, apana, samana, vyana, udana. Five pranas with different five functions, physiological functions. Five pranas, the 10 organs. Now you may say 10 organs, Karmendriya and Gyanendriya. Five organs through which we get knowledge, five organs through which we act. So those are physical things. No, the subtle body also has the organ. When you say eye, it is not the physical eye. Suppose a person is blind, he has eyes, he has everything is there, but somehow that prana which enables him to see is not functioning. There is some disconnect. So he is not able to see. Similarly with all the other sense organs. So there is a subtle counterpart, just as there is a subtle space inside where you have to begin your spiritual life by meditating. You have a subtle eye, Divya Chakshu, the subtle eye, the subtle hearing, where you hear sounds even when they are not physically produced. So there are exactly 10 senses, subtle senses, just as you have 10 gross senses in the Sthula Sharira. All their subtle counterparts which are controlling them or which are making them move. The pranas, without the prana, you can't, the body is a dead body. It may have everything. The heart may not beat. So what's the point in having a heart if it doesn't beat? What's the point in the lungs if it doesn't pump? So the pranas are essential. The subtle body is essential. So five pranas are the five phases of the vital principle. That is, vital principle means the principle which animates the body, prana. They have five names. Shankaracharya explains in the Chandogya Upanishad, because that is the Upanishad which deals with the subtle causal in great detail. It's a very big Upanishad. We will not discuss the whole Upanishad, but in that Upanishad, how creation takes place, what is the connection between gross and subtle body. So 10 organs are not real organs, but according to Vedanta, they belong to the subtle aspect. They control the organs, but they are not part of the organs. The organs are only instruments through which this prana acts. So when you think of Sukshma, you think of the prana. So that is why when you imagine the Ishta, you just don't imagine that he is a physical body, because you don't see the Ishta in the physical. At least the best you can do next, because to photo may be physical, but when you close your eyes, the photo vanishes. Then Thakur becomes, the Ishta becomes subtle. So that subtle is, unless you know what that subtle is, if you know what your subtle body is, then you know what subtle Ishta is. So the whole physical form of Sri Ramakrishna, when you begin the spiritual journey, that is why this discussion is there, to explore the possibilities, how we can have our Ishta influence our prana, how we can have Ishta to influence our 10 organs, so that we lead we evolve in the spiritual sphere. So all these things to understand, first if we know the microcosm, that is ourselves, then we know how the macrocosm, what is the subtle universe, what is the impact of Ishta on the subtle universe, and how it impacts us. Because most of the impacts which are we feel, many may be physical, which we are interacting daily, but it has a subtle counterpart which you have to deal with. And the problem is, in the subtle, you don't know from where it comes. So a proper understanding, and that's why we have to leave it to our Ishta, to the goal of your life, the personality on whom you are meditating, the avatara or whoever it is, because he is the controller of not only our physical body, but like a driver controlling a vehicle, he is controlling our pranas, he is controlling our organs, the hearing, touch, sight, taste, smell, and all the counterparts. And then there are other antakarana, then the mind. So subtle body is not just the 10 sense organs and the prana. They are much more grosser than the mind. And mind also again is twofold, which we have discussed. One is deliberation, determination or decision making, buddhi. And the other is manas, which is also known as antakarana. There are different names, but let us say manas. Manas is easy to understand. Mano, buddhi, ahankara, chitta. That is how it is divided. Mano, buddhi, ahankara, chittani naham. So the pure spirit is not the subtle body. When you talk of subtle body, you take the antakarana to mean mana, buddhi, chitta and ahankara. So Antakarana means the subtle body. Subtle mind, sorry, not subtle body. Subtle body is made of prana, the 10 sense organs, the subtle counterparts, and also the subtle mind. Mind is always subtle. Mind cannot be physical. Mind is subtle, but that mind has been divided here into two parts. One is the decision making function, buddhi, the reactive mind that is known as manas, and then we have ahankara, the ego, and as I told you, which is the most important part, it is chitta. Chitta is the record of all our karmic impressions. They are not yet, they have further gone into the causal state, but they have their impact on the subtle. So when certain thoughts come, when your buddhi gets colored or when your buddhi gets confused, you will find the reasons is either your ego, which is a disturbing factor, or it is something from the chitta which comes and clouds it. So again and again you have to brush and make your buddhi shining brightly, and in that the ishta helps. So that is why we imagine first the work which our mantra and the Eastern has to do is to clear the dirt which is ego, and also clear the manas which is highly reactive and causing so much of conflict. So that peace or that buddhi, that deliberation, that determination or decision or intuition can be felt when this faculty is awakened. But it is just the beginning of our spiritual life. So these are the subtle body. So the next idea, which will conclude now because time is over, the jiva retains, why this is being discussed here is what survives after the death of the body. It is this sukshma sharira. So they are composed of the same materials as the gross earth, liquid, that is apa, teja, vayu, but they are subtle. So they have to be perceived in a very subtle way. So they are extremely fine. They are not indestructible. When you get moksha, even that is destroyed. But at least a spiritual beginner should understand what this sukshma sharira is. So somebody asked Vireshwaranj, I don't have vision. You were saying I want God's vision. God's vision can be had in a subtle state only. It cannot be had. You can't just see Sri Ramakrishna coming and standing in front of you in flesh and blood. You will see in a subtle way. So Vireshwaranji must have just jokingly said, have you seen a ghost? If you have seen a ghost, then at least there is a chance that you will see God. That doesn't mean you have to aspire to see ghosts. But the subtle faculty, the subtle buddhi is fine-tuned. When we do the japa, what it does, it fine-tunes, so we can hope, imagine, or even pray that one day that buddhi will be awakened. And that happens that's why they say the gross mantra becomes mantra chaitanya. They call it mantra chaitanya. The mantra becomes chaitanya. As a constant repetition, the gross mantra slowly, of course, we don't repeat in a loud way. Right from beginning, it is a subtle repetition. But still that subtle repetition once makes that mantra, the sound, very full of awareness or full of consciousness. So here he says it is not destroyed with the destruction of the gross body. This is the subtle body that survives everyone. Everyone leaves this body with a subtle body. At death, only the gross body is left behind. Clothed with the subtle body, the individual soul departs. Where does he go? It it waits. Its migration continues in subsequent bodies, where he again continues the sadhana. Brahma Sutras 4 to 8, they say. So, samsara means it goes back to the world, dies, again goes back to the world, that is known as samsara chakra also, till it is gets final liberation. So, Swamiji says, no matter how bad you are, with repeated blows, you go round and round and round. Finally, the destination of everyone is this moksha. So subtle body continues until final liberation. Only when the final liberation is attained, either as a Jivan Mukta or Mukti after death, the physical body then disintegrates. Till then it continues, and there's no harm, because only when the subtle body gets another new human birth, new human body, it continues its sadhana. So this transmigratory state, that which migrates is the subtle, not the gross. Of course, that is very obvious. The gross body has to be left behind. It is just merges in the gross elements. But the subtle elements cannot be destroyed so easily. But they will be destroyed if the goal is, as Sri Ramakrishna used to give a beautiful example, and I'll conclude, is to say the potter makes pots, and he mixes mud and clay and with water and makes a paste, and then nicely makes different shapes, because you can make a shape only when it is soft. And then he allows it to dry in the sun, and suddenly a cow or some animal comes and just walks over it. So some of the uh, pots which have dried, they just break. So the potter has to just throw them away. He can't join them. Whereas some of the clay which was soft, he just gathers it again. Though the animal has destroyed, the cow has disturbed everything, he says, no matter, the thing is broken, but I can again make a fresh pot using that same mud. But he can't do with the dried one. So that beautiful example Sri Ramakrishna gave, till the pot is dried, that means we attain mukti. Then it doesn't matter whether you broke the pots. You can't be converted into a pot anymore. He has to simply discard it. It's a crude example, but Sri Ramakrishna has to tell, unless your pot cannot be molded further, means the Sukshma Sharira has to merge in the Karana also has to merge in the Ishta, that is the Parabrahman, and that is what Mukti is all about. So we'll conclude now, we'll continue in our next class. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.